So I have some Sun Tzu quotes, and I thought it would be interesting to get your commentary on these quotes.
Yeah, sure.
All right, so here is the first one. The art of war is governed by five constant factors to be taken into account in one's deliberations when seeking to determine the conditions obtaining in the field. These are one, the moral law, two, heaven, three, earth, four, the commander, five, method and discipline. The moral law causes the people to be in complete accord with their ruler so that they will follow him regardless of their lives, undismayed by any danger.
Heck of a lot in the quote. This reference to the moral law, in some regards, I think dovetails real nicely with what we've just been talking about. I think what Sun Tzu is pointing out is that your subordinates are going to be more likely to be loyal and to submit their own lives to a certain cause that you're trying to rally them around, to the extent that they too can see how that cause is morally worth it and is somehow worth such sacrifice. Um, and so it's precisely that moral law that I'm suggesting maybe we could do better at introducing the soldiers to. Um, Now the other one, so like the second one was heaven in the quote.
Yeah,
I gotta
we
admit,
don't have to go to the other ones. I mainly wanted
yeah,
to get
yeah,
your perspective on that first one, and I thought
yeah,
it
yeah,
was
fair enough,
a
fair enough.
good continuation of the last comment that you made.
Right, 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 right,
So
right.
you have to read, does everybody have to read The Art of War in the military?
It's not required in my class. There are excerpts that are required in certain classes, but I actually would hesitate. I don't think every cadet is reading the entire Art of War book. We do have a couple majors that you can choose where I'd be willing to bet they do read the whole thing. We have one major called Defense and Strategic Studies, and it's very much into military theory and grand strategy. And I'll almost guarantee they read it extensively. But outside of that major, I think the only one that every cadet is getting exposed to would be more at the level of excerpts and passages, and not the whole thing.
All right, I was just curious because I skimmed through the book again just to find interesting quotes and stuff. And like Sun Tzu just goes into great detail about like tactics and stuff like that. And like some of the words, they're just like really old, right? It's like he's just writing thousands
Yeah,
of years ago, and it's just I'm not sure how much of it actually applies today, especially when it comes to tactics stuff. You know, like it's very detailed. I think he even talks about like this smoke or something in the air, and then you can kind of tell what the enemy is doing depending on how the dust is dispersing. Like if it's
right,
going this
right.
way, they have chariots, and it's like okay, well, I'm it's not going to be relevant today.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, maybe the example of being that precise in your observations, right, could be transferred, but certainly some of the details not going to transfer.
All right, let's look at another one. All warfare is based on deception. Hence, when able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must seem inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away. When far away, we must make him believe we are near.
Deception is key, and I see the statement as capturing a general rule of thumb that sure is important. But I got to admit, there's maybe sometimes where you want your enemy knowing how strong you are, if in fact you're seeing it as a moment of deterrence, right? Of somehow deterring them from doing something. That just strikes me as maybe one of the few exceptions to this general rule of, yeah, sure, the enemy not knowing these things about you is tactically very helpful. And then in these rare moments, maybe it's not. Maybe in fact, it might be important to somehow let the presence of your large army be its own communicating moment.
No, that makes sense. I can also see a connection to the empathy stuff mentioned earlier, right? Because the more you understand your enemy, the more that you can deceive them.
Potentially, right, right. You'll be that much more accurate, perhaps, in grasping what will deceive them, right, and where they can be deceived. Yeah, 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 yeah. And notice, do you hear the kind of weird tone to empathy at that point? Like, we I think our common cultural use of empathy, it's got embedded in it a kind of very moral sense to it or something, but the more I studied it, the more I kind of separated it maybe from that inherently moral piece. If anything, I think it still contributes to morality in important ways, but But empathy by and by itself might be amoral, or might not have inherently moral component to it.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of Kant, right? And him saying that the only thing good without qualification is the goodwill.
Right. Everything
Everything
else
else could
is
be used badly and for evil means.
right, right, right. That would be exactly in line with this idea that you may not want your villain to be empathetic because it'd make him that much more of an effective villain.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, let's look at another one. Oh, this is a good one. There is no instance of a country having benefited from prolonged warfare.
Yeah. Again, deeply true, right, by and large, and certainly a timely commentary, perhaps. Uh, my only slight resistance to it might be in how we define prolonged. I mean, the American Revolution was at least 6 years, but then it depends on how you cash out some of the unrest prior to 1776 and stuff. And if you define prolonged as something beyond 4 years, let's say, because World War II is technically like 7 years from like 38 to 45. So yeah, I mean, depending on how you define prolonged, maybe there's some exceptions to this, and then also depending on how you define benefit. Um, this is the concern with maybe a utilitarian or consequences approach, right? Of in the short term, maybe some war has been extremely costly, but lo and behold, it is precisely what led to some kind of important historical arc that we want to embrace is really good. So in this regard, I don't know whether it's fair to count where Japan is now versus where it was in 1938, or where Germany was in 1938 versus where it is now. These are benefits that maybe were certainly unknown in 1945, but we're certainly appreciative of now. But yeah, look, in the end, what I like about the quote is maybe it's a very sobering reminder of how war needs to be our last resort. And we need to be very sincere and authentic in our attempts at other things besides war. Diplomacy, I think, is something that gets dismissed all too quickly in the imaginations of some.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds good. So you know what, when I read that quote, I was like, whoa, like that, like the way that is saying it, like he is saying, like, look, this is almost like a law of human nature, and
Yeah,
the I don't know, I just imagine somebody with a lot of military experience like writing this stuff down. I'm like, I'm telling all of you what this truth that I have discovered through all the years of warfare that I've conducted, you
mm,
know? And I
yeah,
just think it's interesting how some statement like that made thousands of years ago can still be true. Because then it just kind of, he is almost talking about human nature.
yeah, yeah. And I guess in a way it's sad, right? Because if we had enough humility or something and attentiveness, maybe we could glean what we need to glean from these incredibly important statements being made by our predecessors. And yet, maybe this is another element of human nature, right? We all too often need to prove it ourselves than maybe take the wisdom that has already been proven or already been painfully gained. Yeah,
Absolutely. And I don't know historically what the wars looked like back then, but how long were their wars? Like
yeah,
I
right,
don't know. And what would Sun Tzu think about the wars that we fought? Like, would he be like,
right,
"Oh my God, you guys are nuts"?
right, right. Yeah, might be.
Yeah. All right, let's take a look at another one. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself, but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle.
So true, so true. In my own assignments where I've been a planner and stuff, right? I mean, I've both listened to generals talk about this and kind of observed it or witnessed it myself too, right? That we can be blind to something about ourselves and it fouls up maybe plans we make or assumptions we make, or blind to something about the enemy and contributes in the exact same way to poor planning and even poor execution. And and empathy, perhaps, I think most plainly connects with this quote out of the ones so far. It's a nice moment, though, to underscore empathy's understanding, not only that it gives us of an enemy that we've talked about at length, but I think empathy also has this really important contribution to make to self-knowledge, because it's through empathetically grasping others that, in fact, you can come to a greater understanding of yourself. And that's almost a direct quote from Edith Stein, who did her dissertation work on empathy. But the best leaders, this is one other reason it's in our leadership doctrine, is that the best leaders can empathetically look at themselves through the eyes of their subordinates and maybe in that regard come to a truer sense of what they're doing and how they're coming across versus an utterly internal conclusion about how they must be coming across. Yeah, empathy's got this massive contribution to make to how we perceive ourselves.